In December 1944, the elite U.S. 2nd Ranger Battalion successfully defended Hill 400 within the contested Hurtgen Forest, withstanding 5 determined German assaults. During the grueling Hurtgen Forest campaign in Germany, an American serviceman penned these words on December 5, 1944. The pathway to battle ran straight through muddy brown earth between the swaying green canopy of shattered, headless fir trees, and in the returning jeeps they transported the survivors. These survivors sat in rear compartments, some perched on back benches, while others faced forward on radiator covers because the vehicles were so overcrowded. From a distance, you could observe the white of their hastily applied bandages, and there were additional survivors stretched on litters suspended between front and rear seats and across radiators, with brown covers pulled up to their necks. Above, the heavens appeared gray. The Hurtgen Forest battlefield covered approximately 50 square miles of challenging, heavily forested landscape along the German-Belgian frontier south of Aachen, the initial major German municipality to surrender to Allied forces. The region was extensively fortified with landmines, razor wire, and hidden concrete bunkers featuring overlapping firing zones. The American First Army received orders to capture this woodland to protect the right wing of the advancing 7th Corps, to deny the Germans the ability to launch counteroffensives from its shelter, and to assault a significant portion of the Germans' permanent fortifications of the Siegfried Line from behind. The key geographical landmark in the Hurtgen stood near Bergstein, known as the Bergberg Castle Hill, which Americans designated Hill 400 due to its elevation in meters, equal to 1,312 feet. Its most precipitous incline reached a 45-degree gradient, and the elevation was densely covered with coniferous trees. From this elevated position, the Germans maintained an excellent view of American activities and coordinated devastating artillery strikes and counteroffensives. No American mechanized or infantry movement escaped notice from this observation point. It served as the foundation of the German defensive line. If the Americans could capture Hill 400, it would offer superior observation off Roer River, the Allies' subsequent target after clearing Germans from Hurtgen. The U.S. 9th Infantry Division initiated the first offensive action into the Hurtgen in September 1944 and remained there through mid-October, advancing 3 kilometers while suffering 4,500 casualties. A fresh assault commenced in November with the 28th Infantry Division. Minimal territory was secured, resulting in 6,184 American casualties. The 4th Infantry Division entered combat at month's end. After enduring 6,053 losses, it was replaced by the 8th Infantry Division in early December. In his work, The Mighty Endeavor, Charles MacDonald characterized the Hurtgen Forest fighting as the hedgerow battles repeated, except this time accompanied by freezing precipitation, sleet, snow, flooding, mud, concrete fortifications, and thick forests reminiscent of terrifying German folklore. It represented the Argonne of World War II. War correspondent and renowned writer Ernest Hemingway provided a more concise description. Passchendaele combined with tree explosions. The soldiers of the 2nd Ranger Battalion, D-Day veterans who had stormed Omaha Beach and some who had climbed Pointe-du-Hoc, were assigned to 7th Corps and became involved in the forest warfare's attrition. Previously, the battalion had remained in Normandy performing various miscellaneous duties. When 7th Corps commenced its advance into Brittany, the Rangers received deployment orders as well. The battalion assisted in capturing the major port of Brest, and following a 2-month break, these combat-experienced soldiers joined the offensive against the Siegfried Line. On November 14th, the 2nd Rangers, attached to the 28th Infantry Division, moved to the front lines with 485 enlisted personnel and 27 officers. General Norman Coda, commanding the 28th Division, who had personally witnessed the Rangers in action at Omaha Beach, employed the 2nd Ranger Battalion to substitute for units of the 112th Infantry Regiment on the front lines. Lieutenant Bob Edlin of the company led his platoon through snow and ankle-deep mire to the village of Jeremeter. There, the Rangers encountered the 112th Infantry. Edlin remembered, the infantry unit that had been positioned there was practically fleeing in retreat just to escape. I encountered a friend in that unit, Captain Preston Jackson, who told me, "Bob, this is the most vicious situation you've ever encountered up there. I wish you wouldn't advance." The Rangers proceeded anyway and immediately experienced their first German artillery bombardment. Suddenly, the shelling commenced. It's the most extreme hell I've ever endured. It was continuous round after round of crashing and smashing, pounding on your skull until you believe there's no way you can endure it, Edlin recalled. The most startling revelation to the Rangers wasn't the enemy but their fellow Americans. Captain S.I.D. Solomon noted his men's observations. The Rangers of Baker Company were astounded to discover the gear equipment, uniforms, and even weapons that had been abandoned by the division troops who had previously occupied this area. Cold conditions and persistent rain didn't improve the morale of those inexperienced American soldiers. Even more troubling was the regiment's abandonment of wounded personnel. Frank South, a medic with the 2nd Ranger Battalion, described the discovery. We relocated to what had been a German troop bunker at the crossroads near Wassenach. When we entered the shelter, we medics were horrified to discover several wounded Americans inside. In addition to abandoning equipment and supplies along the route, the 112th Infantry Regiment deserted some of their wounded in their rush to retreat. Naturally, we treated their injuries and immediately evacuated them. The Rangers conducted patrols, established deeper positions, strengthened their foxholes with timber, and combated the frigid weather. Fortunately, direct involvement by the Supreme Allied Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, helped the 2nd Rangers become better equipped for cold conditions than most regular infantry in the Hurtgen. Bob Edlin explained, while at the encampment, General Eisenhower visited us. The entire battalion assembled around him, and he directly asked if anyone could explain why we lacked the new insulated boots. One soldier shouted, "Hell, General, everyone back at headquarters has them," which was accurate. Everyone at Army, Corps, and Divisional headquarters wore insulated boots, parkas, and warm clothing. That equipment never reached the front lines. We still wore summer uniforms while temperatures were in the low 30s. General Eisenhower said that would be resolved, and bless his soul, it was. Days later, we received insulated boots and even wristwatches. He must have requisitioned the entire headquarters to equip one Ranger Battalion. Near November's end, the 28th Division transferred its frontline sector to the 8th Infantry Division, V Corps. The Rangers remained and supported the 8th, but now served under V Corps command. After the 8th Division assumed the line, the Rangers relocated companies C, D, E, and F a short distance behind the front, and B companies remained deployed on the extreme right flank of the division's 121st Infantry Regiment. Lieutenant James Eichner, responsible for headquarters communications, explained the men's feelings. "We were a specialized unit, all volunteers. Placing us in defensive positions wasn't utilizing our abilities and capabilities, just remaining in those foxholes. We were very disappointed about this. All 3 infantry divisions, the 9th, 28th, and 8th, had attempted to capture Hill 400 but failed. A combat command of the 5th Armored Division tried during the first week of December. Despite armored support, its infantry was also defeated. The 47th Armored Infantry Battalion barely maintained Bergstein against German counteroffensives and was in no condition to participate in another Hill 400 assault. General Walter Weaver, commanding the 8th Division, personally requested that V Corps commander, General Leonard Jarrow, provide Rangers to reinforce the Armored Combat Command in Bergstein and assist his division's next Hill 400 assault. Jarrow, with approval from General Courtney Hodges, commanding the 1st Army, released the 2nd Rangers from V Corps control and transported them from their encampment to Hill 400. Weaver then decided to allow the Rangers to assault the hill independently, preserving his division's strength and allowing the Rangers to operate in their preferred manner. That same day, LT called James Rutter, the battalion commander, was transferred to the 28th Division's 109th Regiment. Captain George S. Williams, the executive officer, and Captain Harvey Cook, the intelligence officer, were summoned to 8th Division headquarters and given the mission. They were to relieve elements of Combat Command Reserve CCR, 5th Armored Division, outside the town and capture Hill 400. Captain George S. Williams, promoted to Major, assumed command of the tactical operation. Major Williams returned to the Ranger Assembly area at 2,130 hours. Trucks transported the Rangers toward Kleinhau. The trucks were scattered, and we had significant difficulty reassembling them, Williams recalled. From Kleinau, the companies began their march to Bergstein. Shortly before the movement, Lt. Col. Rudder hurried back from 1st Army headquarters to assist Williams as much as possible, and Williams proceeded to Brandenburg. The Rangers marched through darkness, mud, and bone-numbing cold to reach Bergstein before dawn. At Brandenburg, Major Williams contacted Colonel Glenn Anderson, the CCR commander. Anderson outlined the challenges his unit had encountered at Bergstein and provided the group with a guide to the Armored Infantry Company command post in the town. Captain Harold K. Slater went to the town's western edge to contact elements of the 5th Armored Division. By this time, companies A, B, and C had arrived. They proceeded through without stopping to establish defensive positions west and south of Bergstein. No troops occupied these positions until their arrival. The 5th Armored personnel were all in basements, and they provided no guides. Fortunately, the 2nd Rangers had 3 lieutenants serving as advanced liaison officers. These men were briefed at the Armored Command Post regarding enemy position locations. The lieutenants helped the battalion move into positions by 0300 hours. 3 companies, A, B, and C, established positions on the edge of woods near the hill's base. Between 0300 and 0500, companies D, E, and F settled into Bergstein. Rudder developed the assault plan before the Rangers departed the encampment. The men were confident in it because it was Rudder's design. Companies D and F would assault Hill 400, while companies A, B, and C secured nearby ridges, established roadblocks, and provided supplemental mortar fire. Company E and CCR tanks remained in Bergstein as the reserve to support the assault or respond to the anticipated German counterattack. A small reconnaissance party from companies D and F surveyed the hill before the assault. Lieutenant Len Lomell led the patrol from Company D. Lomell recalled, the patrol was to identify evidence of pillboxes, bunkers, and enemy positions. I departed with my patrol at 0330 and returned with the information to the battalion forward CP at 0600. Headquarters reviewed the information and transmitted it to the assault companies. The plan still required E Company to serve as the reserve while D and F companies, the assault force, assembled near the church and cemetery in a partially sunken road that paralleled Hill 400's base. The assault was scheduled for 0730 sharp. Williams called for the opening bombardment just before sunrise. The quick, sharp barrage surprised the Germans. At dawn, Williams launched 2 companies across an open field and up the heights, using 1 company's covering fire to support the attack. Companies D and F, totaling 65 Rangers, moved out from their Bergstein positions and crossed the line of departure at 0730. German troops of the 272nd Volksgrenadier Division responded like veterans, scrambling to their positions despite being under the American artillery barrage. S.D. Salomon, commanding B Company, observed the German response. The enemy defenders immediately became alert. A red flare fired into the air from an enemy outpost. Shortly afterward, a heavy mortar and artillery barrage descended on the assaulting Rangers. Heavy small arms and machine gun fire was directed at the charging Rangers. Casualties on both sides began to accumulate. A creeping German artillery barrage behind the assaulting Rangers produced additional Ranger casualties. The enemy offered fierce resistance. 4 machine guns fired point-blank at the Rangers advancing up the hill. A German observation post became active, directing precise mortar and artillery fire. Williams wrote in his after-action report, the Germans poured in mortar 88, 120, and self-propelled gunfire. Company C fired in support of the charge as its companions crossed the field. Salomon described the opening moments of the Ranger advance. The Co at the appropriate time gave the command go, with whooping and yelling as loudly as possible. Firing ammunition clips randomly from their weapons toward the hill, the Rangers ran as fast as they could across the approximately 100 yards of open, cleared field into the machine gun and small arms fire of the German defenders. Crossing the field and before reaching the hill's base, the company commander and his runner became casualties, but undaunted, the remaining D Company Rangers charged up the hill. Lieutenant Lomell described the opening moments of his first platoon's action. The platoon crossed the 100 yards of half-frozen mud, shooting randomly. We were at a full sprint, facing small arms fire. Salomon and Lomell didn't know what really triggered the assault. Staff Sergeant Bill Elrod Petty of F Company did. During the wait for the jump-off, enemy mortars burst about 75 yards behind us and moved toward us, Petty recalled. You could feel the tension building as voices complained about why we didn't charge. We were stuck waiting for our own artillery to lift. We knew the enemy mortars would reach us before our barrage lifted. We were caught in a 200-yard area between the barrages. A new officer ordered a scout forward. McHugh and I screamed at the Guy not to listen to the order. Private Bouchard stood. 4 steps later, he was cut down. This shot was the spark that ignited the explosion of the Ranger charge. I was pulling Bouchard back when I heard McHugh yell, "Let's go get the bastards." Waving his Thompson submachine gun over his head, he broke across the field. As one man, F Company with bayonets gleaming, hip firing, and yelling a battle cry that probably extends back through the ages of time, charged into the jaws of death. I never witnessed a more brave and glorious sight. It was a moment of pride in being a Ranger. Not all Rangers felt thrilled by what was happening. Herman Stein, also of F Company, had more fundamental thoughts. I wasn't thinking about it. My single thought was, let me get the hell across this field into some woods over there. In his book, Citizen Soldiers, author Stephen Ambrose related the Rangers' comparison of Pointe-du-Hoc and Hill 400. Those who were at Pointe-du-Hoc on D-Day recall Hill 400 as worse. It was not as steep, but it was rocky shale with frost and snow on it, and they had no grappling hooks or ropes. It was hand over hand, using the third hand to maintain a stream of fire. Bud Potritz, D Company, was part of the whirlwind of combat advancing up the hill. He remembered Fox Company led the way, followed by the 1st and 2nd sections of the 1st Platoon of Dog Company. We dropped to the ground at the sunken road and began firing our rifles toward the 2 burned-out buildings in front of the D Company attack. Mortar shells fell all around us, and our guys were getting hit. Captain Otto Masney, commander of F Company, gave the order to fix bayonets, and suddenly Mike Shark stood up and yelled, "Come on, you unholy bastards," and off we went. I remember firing from the hip and hollering, "Hi-ho, Silver," as we trotted across the open field toward the base of the hill. Salomon could also observe F Company moving up the hill into enemy strongpoints. An enemy machine gun located at the left lower corner of the hill wounded and killed several of the F Company Rangers as they crossed the open field, he recalled. The remainder of the company continued forward, some running faster than others, all firing their weapons running up the hill. Some of the Germans at the lower base of the hill either turned and ran up the hill to avoid the charging Rangers or stood up and surrendered. Herman Stein figured the Germans saw it this way. Half the fled and half surrendered. I guess if you see 120 men acting like a bunch of Indians coming at you, you think these guys are crazy. We were yelling like mad rebel yells. Private William Anderson, a seasoned Ranger demoted from sergeant to the lowest rank for garrison violations, Sergeant Petty and PFC. Cloys Manning were the first F Company men to reach Hill 400 summit. They discovered an enemy bunker with steel doors on the crest. Petty thrust his Browning automatic rifle bar into an opening and emptied a 20-round magazine. Anderson shoved in a couple of grenades. Just then, an enemy shell exploded, killing Anderson. Captain Masney arrived with additional soldiers and captured the bunker. According to Lomell, Sergeant Harvey Koenig's squad pursued the remaining Germans down the hill, almost to the Roer River, before returning to deploy along the forward crest. By 0835, the 2nd Rangers held the hill and had captured 28 prisoners. The Rangers knew the Germans would respond with an immediate counterattack. Quick preparation and positioning of the men had to be accomplished. The men of D and F companies found it difficult to dig foxholes in the rocky terrain. Both sides recognized Hill 400's tactical importance. The Germans committed the elite 6th Parachute Regiment to counterattack. According to captured German records, Field Marshal Walter Model had offered Iron Crosses and a 2-week leave to any Germans who recaptured the hill. German artillery pounded Hill 400. The explosions showered the Rangers with deadly shrapnel. The shale prevented them from digging in, but the bunkers provided some shelter. Potritz remembered. Shells hit the hill from 3 sides. We could hear our comrades trying to dig in. There were screams of dying men. The smoke burned our eyes and nostrils. It was horrific, and the voices of the wounded tore our hearts. The barrage cost casualties in more than one way. In his book Closing with the Enemy, historian Michael Doubler reported the psychological impact. One new replacement in the 2nd Ranger saw the head of a fellow Ranger less than 3 feet away blown completely off. The new soldier became speechless, did not know his name, and could not recognize anyone around him. The Rangers evacuated the replacement off the hill between counterattacks. He ended up in a stateside psychiatric ward. The Rangers were too weak to defend all positions along the line simultaneously. Lomell had to determine where the Germans were concentrating strength to attack. He boldly sent out 2-man reconnaissance patrols to check likely enemy assembly areas down the hill. With the intelligence the patrols gathered, Lomell was able to meet each thrust with the little strength he had. As a result, Hill 400 was saved by intelligence and courage at the junior level. Staff Sergeant Petty, in charge of what remained of F Company, organized his defense on the hill summit. Hermann Stein took the 1st and 2nd platoons and established positions near the hill's bottom toward the river. I am convinced that these 6 to 8 men were the crucial factor that kept F from being overrun, claimed Petty afterward. He was correct. The Germans focused their efforts that day entirely on F Company in an attempt to recover the bunker. The first of 5 German counterattacks during the next 2 days struck the Rangers at 0930. In each assault, the German force numbered between 100 and 150 men. Most of the attacks developed from the south and east where wooded areas close to the hill's base allowed a company of German paratroopers to launch the assault. Major Williams described one of the counterattacks. Germans were in and around the bunker on the hill before the Rangers were aware of their presence. Once on the hill, they attempted to rush the positions. They used machine guns, submachine guns, rifles, and threw stick grenades. Hand-to-hand fights developed on top of the hill in which some use was made of bayonets. Petty was wounded in the fight and was evacuated that night. The Rangers held, forcing the Germans to regroup. The enemy artillery did not cease. By noon, 2 of the Ranger companies counted only 32 men. The survivors of D Company lost their commanding officer just before the German counterattacks began. Captain Masney was captured attempting to move down the hill to bring up more reinforcements. Lomell was the sole officer of D Company still standing. Lomell was also wounded, his left index finger nearly severed and bleeding from the ears from the concussions of the artillery barrage. General Weaver was unable to disengage any troops to relieve the Ranger Battalion. Stuck on the hill, the Rangers repelled every German counterattack over the next 40 hours. The German paratroopers launched a second counterattack at mid-afternoon as about 150 men struck F Company. Ranger casualties increased, Lomell recalled. We were outnumbered 10 to 1. We had no protection, continuous tons of shrapnel falling upon us, hundreds of rounds incoming. German efforts were about to succeed when a single Ranger turned the tide. Lomell recalled the moment. My platoon sergeant, Ed Secker, a very quiet man, out of ammunition and unarmed, seized 2 machine pistols from wounded Germans and in desperation charged a large German patrol, firing and screaming at them. His few remaining men rallied to the cause, and together they drove the Germans back down the hill. By 1600 hours, the Rangers had only 25 men left on Hill 400 summit. We had stopped another counterattack, but if the Germans had known how many men or really how few we had up there, they would have kept coming, reflected Lomell. The desperate situation seemed to be sensed back at Ranger headquarters in Bergstein. Major Williams dispatched urgent messages to General Weaver for reinforcements, but none were available. Williams assembled a platoon of 10 men from E Company in Bergstein and sent them scrambling up the hill. The unit arrived at the critical moment just as the third counterattack erupted. The Germans struck with both of their regrouped companies. American artillery was the key to repulsing the third German counterattack. More precisely, it was one American forward observer, 1st LT Howard K. Kettlehat, from CCR's 56th Armored Field Artillery Battalion. He had a clear 360-degree field of vision atop the hill. As the German wave crested the hill from 3 directions, Kettlehat brought down the American firepower. At one point, Kettlehat brought down fire from all artillery available in the Corps minus 18 battalions in all. 155s, 75s, self-propelled 8-inch and 240mm guns placed a ring of explosive shells around the hill, remembered an observer. Kettle directed the barrage to keep the German paratroopers out of the hilltop positions and to prevent further reinforcements from the woods. This counterattack, together with another at 1500 hours, was beaten back. The evacuation of the wounded was difficult during the fight. The first aid station in the bunker held as many as 20 wounded at a time. When night fell, ammunition bearers clambered over the snow, ice, and rocks up to the top and returned, carrying the wounded on stretchers. Around 2,100 hours, several men from E&C companies performed the duty. Medic John Worthman recalled the arduous process of moving the wounded. Most wounded had to be carried back to the aid station on stretchers. Carrying stretchers is cruel work in good terrain and inhuman punishment on wet hillsides under tree bursts. Stretcher jeeps were waiting at the hill's bottom. Nearly every jeep in the battalion was used for the evacuation. The battalion physician, Captain Walter E. Block, taught his medics never to hesitate to go in harm's way to care for a ranger. Block was killed while tending the wounded and coordinating the evacuation when a shell burst on the aid station's roof. Throughout the night, the Germans shelled the Rangers. "We stayed out all night," Stein said later. "There was a sort of drizzle. At that point, we had about 6 guys from F Company left. One of these men included a replacement, Julian Hanahan, who fought like a veteran. We had a few guys down below at the base of the hill." Lomell summarized the entire first day on Hill 400. "It was a death factory. One way or another, they got you. You froze to death, or you got sick, or you got blown to bits." June 6, 1944, was not my longest day. December 7, 1944, was my longest and most miserable day on Earth during my past 75 years. Just after dawn on December 8th, E Company reported being counterattacked from the north by troops coming from Obermalbach. The German 6th Parachute Regiment probed the hill under the cover of artillery fire. At 0808, friendly artillery fire, which was already on the way, was requested on the road to the north. It proved effective, and the Germans withdrew. Kettlehet and the artillery easily handled the morning attack. Captain Arnold recalled the most difficult attack of the 8th. The heaviest counterattack of the fight was launched at 1500 on December 8. Between 100 and 150 men, supported by direct fire of the 88s, self-propelled guns, mortars, and artillery, attacked from all sides. 5 of them, German soldiers, got within 100 yards of the church, which was being used as a first aid station. Artillery fell all around the aid station, one round entering one window and leaving through another, taking away part of the second window. This attack lasted 2 to 3 hours and was beaten back by artillery. During the night, the Germans tried to slip through the Rangers' foxholes toward the bunker. The Rangers hit the small German groups with short bursts of bar and rifle fire or grenades. A 20-minute final barrage from the American artillery drove the Germans off the hill for the 5th and final time. The German attacks had all been directed at D, E, and F companies and had inflicted severe casualties on the Rangers. However, the Rangers held with sheer determination and accurate artillery support. By nightfall on December 8th, General Weaver had reorganized the lines of the 13th Infantry Regiment and was able to free up a battalion. Trucked to Hill 400, the infantrymen shuffled up the slope to the crest during the night. The Rangers were finally relieved. During 40 hours of intense fighting, the 2nd Ranger Battalion had lost 107 men wounded, 19 killed, and 4 missing, a quarter of their original strength. But the Rangers had seized Hill 400, the first American unit to do so in the 4-month battle. Unfortunately, 9 days later the Germans retook the hill from the 13th Regiment. The U.S. Army would not seize Hill 400 again until February 1945. The December engagement on Hill 400 concluded the Battle of Hurtgen Forest campaign. The 2nd Rangers had demonstrated their excellence. SID Salomon summarized it best. "The people in command did not understand what the Rangers were. A combat command of 5th Armored Division, 3,000 men with tanks, failed to take the Bergberg. 3 companies of Rangers, just 200 soldiers, captured and held it.